a sore knee, so the knee doesn't bend properly, that bending responsibility has to go somewhere else to the linkage. So then they will start building cumulative stress at another location. Well, that location is going to get sore. Can I just say one other point here, which is so important, and we don't often get to this in these discussions, but it's the component of exposure. In other words, you can have a person who moves very poorly, but if they never exposed to the stresses, then it doesn't matter. And then you get another person who moves really, really well and they still get hurt because their exposure is enormous. They'll be doing tremendous amount of training. So that exposure needs a bit of discussion.
Totally. One of the things that is relevant to
I'm enjoying this, by the way.
Thank you so much.
This is a conversation.
I'm so happy I'm not wasting your time.
No, I'm really enjoying you.
All right. One of the things that always keeps playing on my mind when I read about this particular school of thought, and it's a pretty powerful school of thought today, is, you know, your foot is connected to your shoulder through the facial lines which spiral up from one side to the other, and the facial system obviously is a reality, but is it actually so powerful that it can cause problems far away from, like I said, certain schools of movement believe that, you know, your foot problem is what is causing your shoulder pain because they're all connected. Is this something you would say relevant to the low back? I know you're going to stick to your low back. Would you say that this is going to be evidence-based, or would you say that this is, you know, kind of deriving or inferring from whatever you're seeing?
I don't think the science is well developed enough for us to point to a study on any of this, Ram. All we can do is trust ourselves in seeing all these different clinical presentations, and when you see enough of them, you recognize patterns. So now I can, with that little preface, I'll try and answer the question this way, and again, it depends. That won't surprise you. I would say it doesn't matter two little hoots in some people, but in others it's critically important. I'm sure you've had a few fibromyalgic patients with very heavy myalgic overlay. They have headaches, and when they describe their pain, they will do swirling patterns over their shoulders, or they'll do swirling patterns over their hips and describing their pain, and they say, and this pain radiates up through my back. Well, when we did intramuscular EMG years ago, when we were implanting electrodes into the deep muscles of the spine, as they were popping through the various layers of fascia, and of course we had to develop the insertion techniques on ourselves first. So I've experienced all these fascial layers of pain. It creates exactly the same scratchy, swirly pain that the patients describe. You know, they don't make a fist and say, oh, it's a boring pain like a nail going in my shoulder or my back. It's always an open-handed, swirly sort of expression of that pain. And that's exactly how I would characterize this pain that radiates up the fascial planes when you irritate it. You know, even say you're putting a cannula through psoas and quadratus lumborum and you just tickle the peritoneum on the backside. You get a swirly pain all the way around that focuses below the navel and above the pubis. Doesn't matter where you touch the peritoneum. Yeah. So there's just another great example of how these pains just go to a spot and travel up through the body. But if I can give you one more example that you'll appreciate. Say I wanted to stretch a psoas that was really facilitated because of heavy back pain or hip pain, and we've measured this, by the way. So you can stretch the hip flexors, and it really stretches iliacus primarily, and perhaps some rectus femoris, but not psoas. But if you take the hand up overhead, if I can just change the screen, and push right up like that, all of a sudden the psoas way down at the hip gets much tighter, and then do this with the hand. and then push. Again, it's a spiral heel push of the hand that in some people it will tighten up their psoas, and in others it doesn't matter a hoot. So again, you know, it depends, but I will not dismiss the importance of this in the right patient.
Awesome. That's such a fascinating answer. Rolling and crawling, are these activities which would benefit someone with low back aches?
You know, I'll answer it this way, and honestly, I don't know. That's the real answer. But there's so much discussion now among clinical groups with you know, this DNS, dynamic, what is it, neuromuscular stabilization and whatnot, that really emphasizes these patterns, and I really don't know too much about them. All I can say is there will be some patients who are unable to get off the floor without stressing their back. So if we teach them a baby's crawl, over a straightened leg, locking the rib cage and pelvis together, and just teach them those efficient mechanics, now they're able to get off the floor. Or you might have an older person who is losing their athleticism, and I could give you one example. We had one older lady. She was actually a subject in a clinic I was giving over in England. And she came in, they brought her in, there was about 100 docs in the audience. And she started to cry, actually, and she said, "I'm going to have to leave my home." The reason being, when she toilets herself, she's afraid of falling, getting off the toilet. And not that she's afraid of falling, but that she would be left there for a day and no one would come and feed her cat. That was what she was really concerned with. And yet, when we showed her the baby's crawl, how to get back up off the floor with her limited athleticism, she completely changed. And then she walked away saying, "I don't have to go into a patient care facility now. I can stay in my home." So it's a crazy story, but it's true. And so that's the power of teaching a pattern to someone who that's at the limit of their athleticism.
Yeah, fine. Let's get on to a bit of training info. We have this issue which is constantly troubling or entertaining people in the internet, is during heavy loading, if it's a deadlift or a squat, should you be looking up or should you be creating a double chin, packing your neck? And so it's neck in extension or neck in neutral or slight flexion, whatever it is.
What's the answer?
It depends.
It depends. Yes, I know. This is wonderful. You know, you see some lifters, power lifters and weightlifters with very long necks. And they actually use their neck like this. They start the pull, and then they pull with their neck like that to start the pulse.
Yes.
That drives up
Yes.
and pulls the hips through.
Right.
And yet you see some other people with sort of shorter, squatter necks, and they pack it, and then the hip drive really comes from the hips. It's not created with a pulse from above. So there's two contrasting body types.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, you see Konstantinov, you know, that great power lifter from Latvia, and he looks down at the ground and he dives down, but he's really using the stretch reflex and the storage and recovery of elastic energy in his passive tissues of his backside, and yet you look at another lifter and they fix their eyes at 30 degrees above the horizon at a point on the wall. So who knows? But I can say that I have a colleague now in Serbia, actually, and they're measuring nerve conduction velocities as a function of what you're looking at and the length of the neural tension.
You've got calls. The world is calling.
Sorry, the phone's ringing. I think. Kath, could you get the phone, please?
Just a, sorry, I just switched the battery on. I was running out of power.
Okay, all good.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that was just. I'm in my home office right now. It's 8 o'clock at night.
Okay.
But in any case, it appears that when you stretch a nerve by looking down, the nerve thins out. The conduction velocity is a function of the thickness of the nerve. So if you put a stretch on a nerve, it slows down not only the conduction velocity, but the volume of nerve pulses that it's sending on the pulse train. So if you want ultimate strength, you're really trying to densify the nerve pulse train to the muscle. So that would argue more for an upright kind of a neck, not a Konstantinov flexed neck, more of the packed neck type. So that's arguing it from a physiological perspective.
So essentially, we could try how it feels with any given individual. We let the individual decide.
Yeah, well, now that becomes another really interesting question. The way I would go at that, because you learn so much from elite athletics. You see the full spectrum, and it works for different people. So to become dogmatic and say thou shalt do it this way, probably. But it'll mean you'll be good with a few people, but not great with everybody. So my approach to that would be to start and see what nature does for them, how they lift naturally, and then I will look for tissue stresses, poor mechanical advantages, and see if I can tweak their form a little bit in the direction that my experience and my scientific training would say would create a better performance in a less risky way.